All right. Marsha Acker, thank you so much for making the time to come on to the Conversation Factory. I'm super grateful that you could spare this moment from your day. Coming back from vacation, no less.
I know.
Shot
Thanks.
out of a barrel of a gun. How do you introduce yourself at parties? This is my nice way of asking, like, what do you do when people ask that? What do you do? How do you explain what you do?
Yeah, it depends on who I'm talking to. So sometimes I just say I'm an executive coach, and sometimes I say things like I help people and leadership teams dig themselves out of circular conversations.
Wow.
So depends on who I'm talking to.
But. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Where did the dig themselves out of circular conversations? That's actually a really beautiful metaphor. Yeah. Where did that come from? Where does that sit with you?
It's a bit of my kind of own learning lineage, I guess. I I'm a professional certified coach through the Coaches Training Institute, and then I went on to do some other team coaching work through ORSC and the Team Coaching Institute. But then I guess it's been about 6 years ago, I through a colleague actually ran across an organization in the UK called Dialogics, and they were teaching methodology and theory by David Cantor called structural dynamics. And that was my first foray into structural dynamics, and it informs pretty much everything. I call it my glasses.
Yeah.
So it's really how I look at the world now. So whether I'm interacting with my daughter at home, or whether I'm coaching a leader, or whether I'm coaching a team, it's the glasses that I wear to look at how the conversation's going.
Yeah.
And I really came through that work to appreciate how much our conversations impact the outcomes that we get. So if I have a conversation with my daughter or with my colleague at work, or I watch a conversation unfold with a team, like I can see now why that conversation either propels somebody forward, and they, both parties leave it feeling like, yeah, we got something done, and we're feeling good about it, versus feeling like they're stuck, or having, a Groundhog Day conversation. You go, hey, we've been here before. Did we just have the same conversation?
Yeah. So there's like so many things swirling. And I want to, because I have a note over here where the reason I found out about you, just to put this in context for the listeners, is Dan Mezek, who I had on the podcast last year, who I learned a ton from, recommended your course. It's a 5-day Agile intensive, which sounds honestly like a good time to me. Yeah. And I was like, that's, and I'm what I think of as a conscious competence, and also I'm aware of my facilitation, and I study it, and I'm working hard to make it better all the time. And you talk about, this is, I think, maybe one of the phrases I dug was, what are the beliefs and assumptions underneath a facilitation and coaching mindset? And that was like there is a philosophy behind it. And the thing that I want to sort of talk about really briefly, this is a long and complicated question, is like this idea of moving conversations forward versus them being stuck, versus slowing things down. And, because I think there's sometimes it's like, okay, we got to move forward, and it's about speed. And lately I've been aware of what does it mean for us to really, really slow the conversation down so that everything is really conscious and intentional. It's not just really about getting somewhere. It's about experiencing it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sparks anything in you, but that's the sort of, that's the conversation in my head about that lately.
Yeah. So wow, there's there's two ways I can answer that. One is both I can talk about the content, and then I can also talk about the structure of what you're pointing to, the fast versus slow.
Yeah.
So that's my lens that I look at everything with. But I think that, so yes, I believe that kind of how we approach facilitation does start with our assumptions and our beliefs.
Yeah.
And I've had the absolute frank honor of getting to work with a ton of leaders and helping them learn facilitation skills. And I think one of the things that drew me to facilitation many years ago was that it was a different way of leading. So I went to a 5-day course myself. It was 1994. And it completely shifted how I think about, engaging with people, whether it's work or life or home or Girl Scouts or whatever that I'm doing. And so I really have a passion about bringing that forward to leaders. But I think that facilitation as a competency gives leaders the ability to lead in different ways. So I think one of the first things that so I talk a lot about growing leadership range. So I think we all have a view of leadership that looks like leading from the front. I'm giving direction, I'm setting the course, I'm making moves. And I think there's lots of other places that you can lead from. So facilitation in some ways can be somebody's first intro into leading from behind. How can you get others to make their moves and put ideas on the table and really support and question, not question as in opposition, but question as in seeking to understand what others are saying.
And if I can just sidebar that for a second, for me, my biggest, maybe I would say, fear as a facilitator is that I will enable a group to have something that, I don't know, if I cause them or push them in a certain direction, that's me. And I leave because, and then does it lose the momentum because I'm no longer forming it. It's got to be something from inside them, and maybe that's just part of my facilitator's philosophy. That I want it to come from inside them, and all I'm doing is maybe crystallizing it or getting them to see it. It's not me saying, "Oh, what about this idea over here?"
Yeah.
And that's a different leadership, mindset.
It is and I think it stretches you. I think it stretches all of us. I mean, it still stretches me today. Like sometimes I walk into a room, and as much as I believe that the group has the wisdom, and I definitely have in my repertoire, it's easier for me to actually lead from the back than it is from the front sometimes. So it comes more naturally, and yet there are times where I'm just sitting there going, "Oh, but you're missing the point." So I think there's a natural tension of like figuring out where to find that balance.
But
I do think it's important about to be in touch with your own beliefs and assumptions that you have when you step in front of a room.
I mean, how do you check that for yourself? Like, where's that for you?
So we have a what we call a facilitation stance, and I like to think of it as like it's an offering of here's a couple of perspectives to hold, to like try on and start out as you're starting as a facilitator. And then I believe that if we're growing as facilitators, what we're essentially doing is creating our own stance as we go. So, you'll take the one that we offer up, and you'll take things and you'll say, nope, that's not for me. It's not in my stance, but this is. And so you'll begin to sort of refine and build that over time. So for me, I'm really clear about what's in my stance and what's not in my stance. And I'm, so for example, one of them is I have a belief of bringing the conversation in the room versus having a conversation seep out into other spaces. And so building a container that helps actually invite the conversation in and make people feel like they can voice what they have to say.
Okay.
So like that's a principle that I hold.
Can you say more about like in the room versus like people like physically like going out to breakouts, or do you mean like say a little more about that?
A little metaphorically, like I think what happens a lot of times is what's said in the room is what feels safe or what people ultimately want to bring in, and then the real conversation goes offline. or it goes out to the water cooler, it goes out to the break
Gotcha.
that you have, outside when you step out of the room, or you go back to your desk after a meeting and you go,
Yeah.
here's what I really think about what just happened.
Right. So what's your invitation to get people to be willing to get to that level of realness and risk taking?
It depends on where the team is at. So sometimes I hold that principle, but if it's a new team that's just forming, I hold it loosely. And I ask people, I make it part of the design as we're getting started and we're creating agreements for how we're going to work. I just make the request, like, will you bring the conversation in the room versus taking it offline? And what would you need to do that? So sometimes I'll tee it up that way. But I think part of it depends on how the group of people is coming together. Have they been working together for a while? Is safety an issue?
Sure.
So all those things factor in. But
yeah, so it's in a way, it's like it's part of your initial invitation, and it's part of the sort of the agreements that you ask people to abide by.
Right.
By being in the room, like.
So sometimes I'll say, if you have this impulse to say something and you have it 3 different times, like on the 3rd time, maybe you just say it.
Right.
Right? Rather than writing it in your notebook or holding back or withholding or taking it offline or saying it to the person sitting next to you, because we want to hear your voice. We want to hear your perspective.
Yeah. I think that's really creating that container for people to take that risk means that whatever is said can be dealt with in a safe way.
Yeah.
Whereas if it seeps out, then it can potentially then it goes right back into whatever habitual, pattern they might have. So I understand why you'd want that.
Yeah. I think it also informs part of the belief that I have about, I want the team, the group, to be able to chart its own path forward. And so to do that, they need the data. So any data, anything, even for somebody to say, I'm feeling lost in this conversation, or I'm confused about where we're going, that kind of data is super helpful. But I want it into the pool of meaning that we're creating in that meeting space, in that conversation. So it's just kind of an invitation to say, bring it in.
Yeah. That phrase "pool of meaning" is really interesting. It's like the data environment that people share. It's what everyone sort of understands or knows. How do you? What's the best way of that of like architecting that pool of meaning? Like, how do you get people to have a shared pool of meaning?
Well, so I can answer that in a couple of ways. So one of the concepts that I work with is structural dynamics, which says that there are kind of 4 different layers to any conversation that we're having. There's the action in our conversation. There is the communication domain, so the language that we're using. And there is an operating system that we're speaking from when we speak. So all of this it's a theory of face-to-face conversation. So it's all coming out as I talk to you and you talk to me.
Yeah.
We could actually code our conversation.
Interesting.
What I'm going for in creating that pool of meaning is creating a range of all of those actions, operating system, and communication domains to be voiced by different people in the meeting, so that it does create a richer pool of meaning.
Yeah.
So I think about it as growing both range for a facilitator, for whoever's kind of leading the meeting, but also for the participants.
Yeah.
So I want them to also be aware, but it requires us to look at both what we're talking about, like the topic, and then also how we're having the conversation.
Right. And not just how, like what words we use, and it's very interesting. So can you talk a little bit more, because I wanted to go back to the dialogics and the structural dynamics. So this is an area of facilitation. It's very interesting to talk to somebody who just has a completely different heritage, right? And that,
Yeah.
especially given the fact that we've both come to the same point, like, oh, well, here's the crux of the matter. How do we talk?
I know. I find that I'm loving it. So yeah.
So tell me, like, what assuming I'll find it on Wikipedia, but this save us the trouble. When I was a kid, my dad would be like, "What do you want me to explain it to you in 25 words or less?" And I was like, "Yes,
yes, please."
So most of us don't know what that is. So tell us why it's important that we should know about it.
So the theory of structural dynamics comes from David Cantor. He's with the Cantor Institute in Boston. And he wrote a book called Reading the Room. So that's on Amazon. That's probably the most concise place that sort of documents the theory. So what it is, it's a theory of face-to-face conversation. Mm-hmm. And there are 4 levels. So actions. Mm-hmm. So the action modes are the easiest I think they're the easiest to kind of see and start to identify in a conversation. And so there's 4 possible actions. So everything that we say could be coded into either a move. So a move sets direction in the conversation. A follow continues the conversation. A third one is a pose, and a pose offers correction. And a 4th is bystand. So a bystand is a morally neutral comment. So I might say
there's no jerks in this. There's not a 5th like asshole. Because I feel I feel like I want to talk to live. Like I think there's actually like a pose doesn't seem strong enough for some of the range of human emotion that exists. But
well, in your model,
just put a pin in that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in your model, it might be.
Sorry.
But what I love about just being able to name 4 actions is that ultimately what we're going for is to be able to name in a neutral way what's happening, because exactly what you just said. So many groups have this pattern where somebody will play the devil's advocate, or they will make an oppose, but they do so by playing a role that they think is required. And so you asked me what's my axe to grind. If I had an axe, it would be about kind of eliminating these stereotypes that we assign people when they come to a meeting. Like, because we load them up. We say, that guy always comes to the meeting and he's always our devil's advocate. And so then his voice, one, because we're not really sure, is he playing a role or does he really think that? So that's the first thing. And then sometimes I think the oppose that voice is offering just isn't always as clear.
Yeah, and in a way I feel like this is where using things like the 6 thinking hats just liberates people from whatever their habitual roles are, and then also gives people other roles. It's funny, like I think of when I teach the sort of shape of creativity through the design thinking lens, I talk about opening, exploring, and closing. Yeah. And in my own personal experience, I feel like people tend to feel more comfortable in one mode or another and uncomfortable with other modes. And I think I can definitely see how somebody can I'll just use I statements. I have myself been emotionally stuck in one or the other. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think, we can be in an opposition. We're just could be grumpy that day versus like, we have a real principle that we're following. Like, I think we should always put on the black hat and make sure we're thinking about this thing from all these other directions. What's really cool about this, one of the things that's come up through the last year of doing this podcast is this concept of threading in conversations. So like Google uses it, their agent is more conversational than Amazon's, because they actually have a theory of conversation that involves this idea of threading the conversation. And the classic example they use is, if I ask you if you know who's going to the party next week and you say yes, you are not actually following the laws of helpful threading. Like you're not actually moving or opposing. You're sort of giving me a response that has not enough information in it and doesn't like keep the thread moving. Yeah. And that's really interesting to sort of see these sort of 4 moves as a way of like defining what a thread is.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like I was going to say, because we could apply, just using your example, we could apply the actions. So what the theory of structural dynamics says is that we need all 4 of those actions to be actually voiced in order to be in a productive conversation. And what happens, so my war against stuck conversations
Yes.
or unproductive conversations is actually finding and noticing and helping people see patterns where one or more of these is missing.
Yes.
And the cool thing about it is that when you see the pattern of what's missing, it's easy conceptually, sometimes harder in practice,
yes.
depending on where you're coming from or the situation or the people that you're talking to, but you can self-diagnose and bring the other thing that's needed.
Yeah.
So in your example of that you just gave, it was really a move and it was a follow. But sometimes a move and a follow need more context in order to propel the idea.
Yeah, and so what I'm looking at here is my sticky note where you talk about getting collaborative conversations to flow. Yeah. And it seems like knowing what some of these stuck patterns are is important, but also giving people good patterns. And I guess that's where your coaching comes in.
Helping people find the pattern that's playing out both for them. So we each will have an action that we tend to use more than the others, but this is behavior. So it's action in the moment in a conversation. So it's not personality preference or something that's ingrained in me. It's a choice that I'm making. And so I have the choice, I can, when I'm more aware, when I'm more conscious about how I'm engaging the conversation, I can bring the other actions that are needed. So sometimes there are a couple of patterns that play out typically, but sometimes one of the more common patterns is that people can be what we call stuck in move. They can overuse move. And so you'll find these to be people who are frequently putting ideas on the table or changing the topic of the conversation. So there'll be multiple ideas put forward in one conversation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Like my multi-part questions.
Yeah.
This is a 6-part question.
Yeah.
And I think that, rather than me say, what do you think why do you think people are stuck in that move thing? What's that about?
I think it can be a number of reasons. If I think about a time when I personally have been stuck in move, it's often because there's some idea that I want to move forward or something that I care about pretty significantly. And so I will explore different moves to put on the table. Sometimes it's also governed by my operating system. So I told you there are 3 layers, which are the actions, the operating system, and the communication domain. So I can make a move in random meaning. And a move in random meaning might be, I think we need to look at different options for the strategy that we're considering because we really haven't evaluated the impact in our sector yet fully. So that's a meaning conversation is where I'm looking to make connections about data, how it connects to other things. And random is my operating system propensity for exploring all different things. So it's a place of creativity and invention, but any of them overdone, so random overdone can feel like there's no threading. We're not pulling a thread on anything or following what we've done.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Can you say more about? Yeah, no, it is. And so it's action, OS, and the communication domain. Those are the 3. Yeah. What do you mean by the OS? Because I've been doing some thinking about what is your, as a facilitator, how you sort of.
So the 3 operating systems are open, random, and closed. And I think they map probably fairly well to how you talk about, you said it a minute ago, but exploring, evaluating, deciding. So the operating systems, we can look at them both individually in a conversation, or we can look at them in a really meta way to talk about how a team is working or how an organization typically operates at a really meta level.
Yeah.
But open system is like looking for collaboration, looking for input, looking to hear all voices, all ideas. So facilitation totally lives in the space of open system. If I individually make a move in open, I'm often looking for, I might say, let's go to lunch. What do you all think?
Yeah.
That's in open system because I'm seeking input for it.
Yes.
Closed system is more of hierarchy, structure.
Yes.
The rules are important in closed system.
Yes.
So if I made a move in closed, I might say we're going to go to lunch.
Right.
I'm not interested in whether you'd like to or not, or what you think about it.
Right. We're going to lunch, guys.
Yeah, in closed system, you might see more deference to power or hierarchy in a room, in a conversation. You'll notice closed system in a group, and it can happen with if you've got a really senior developer or somebody who just holds a lot of power in a group, you'll start to notice people defer to them. Sometimes deferring, could look like just simply looking at somebody before you say something.
Yes.
But so power is the dynamic of structure.
Yeah.
And then random is random.
Yeah.
It happens more spontaneously. It's a place of creativity.
Yes.
R&D departments will often operate with a random operating system.
So this is fascinating because the episode that I'm editing right now, that I recorded a couple of weeks ago, with Steve Portigal, who's a user researcher and writes a lot about user research, and I had attributed to him, apparently incorrectly, this idea of how to break an impasse. And I'm curious. This is fascinating for me to see how you would analyze this in your framework. It's about the power of bad ideas, and so in that open modality, it's very easy for a group to be like, oh, I don't know, we had Thai last week, or it just, in a truly open and unstructured conversation, it can kind of who gets to make the decision, right? And then it can just be like, Jesus Christ, okay, let's go to McDonald's.
Yeah.
And then what happens is people rise up in opposition to that, or just say, oh, sure, fine. But usually what happens is oh no, let's get some real food. And then it redirects, or it concretizes the direction of the conversation somehow. Yeah. And in design thinking, we often talk about the power of bad ideas or bad to good ideation. And I don't know what does that look like? What does that mean from how does that fit into a structural dynamics perspective? What is that?
So somewhat of what I hear in that is a group that has a team or group propensity for open system, and may have a real bias against closed system in any form or fashion.
Yeah.
And so it can look like open system overdone. So I think the fun, fascinating conversation to have with a group like that might be to just bystand and say, what I notice is every time we have a meeting, or often when we have a meeting, this is the kind of conversation that happens.
Yes.
We talk about a lot of things, but we're not coming to any firm decision.
Yeah.
And then you might put a move forward and just say, I think what we need is more closed system. What would more closed system look like here? That would be a very open way of asking a group, how do they want to bring closed system, and what do they see? Do they see a missing? Yeah. Do they see it missing as well? Because I think groups that have experienced it a lot, like open system overdone, they can feel exactly that way. It's I can't be part of another conversation where we're asking everybody what they think.
Yeah. Well, and so this kind of goes to maybe this is just my conversation mode, and sort of the thing that I'm researching behind this is my own approach is generally to make sure that people think their own thoughts before we share a group pool of meaning. That's sort of my move that allows, it's well, what does everyone want to do for lunch? And let's put it up on a wall. And then we'll know what everyone thinks. And then we can figure out what to do with all of that data. We have to encounter, but now we have to deal with the fact that everyone thinks something different, or half people want to do one thing and half want to do the other.
Yeah.
Because that's an honest approach to creating a pool of meaning for me. Like that would be my.
So I have, my profile is actually bystand and open affect. So when I say my baseline profile, it just means those are the ones that I use the most. They come most natural to me. So open system is my thing. It's my go-to. And I will tell you personally where I have noticed and suffered from that is that I have had in the past a real aversion to closed system. I don't like being part of it, and I don't like bringing it. And I can create situations where I've asked everybody for their opinion and they all disagree. And I do need to, like, we need to move forward.
Yeah.
And somebody's not going to be happy, or somebody's not going to like the decision.
Yes.
But I need to make it.
Yeah. And is that like more internal to your own organization? I'm guessing as a facilitator, you wouldn't necessarily have to deal with that sort of a choice.
It's my own leadership.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man, we can talk about how the cobbler's children have no shoes another time.
Yeah.
Because like when you're a facilitator, I used to, and I do advocate, it's good to have somebody who's managing process and not content, but when you're a small team, it's kind of absurd to, when at my company, the design gym, there was 3 of us, and it's like one of us is going to facilitate the other 2 guys. Like that's a little absurd.
Yeah.
And so then we have to have better patterns, obviously. Yeah. So like I have so many questions, like because getting people to see a pattern and getting them to change it is one thing, because there's habitual approaches, and then there's like changing a team of teams in an organization. Like org change is not a trivial undertaking. It's not for the lighthearted. I think you're far more certified in org change than I am. I think we all attempt it. Like, do you have a theory of change with regards to org change as well? Like that's, or does Dialogics have a point of view on that as well?
I have my thinking on org change has certainly evolved over the years. And I have worked with organizations in change for quite some time. I would say where I'm at now is this notion of conversations. I have watched, so one, I think org change happens with the leaders in the organization. And I think that I'm a proponent. It's not the only thing that's needed in an organization, but I am a proponent of, if you want change to occur in an organization, I think it has to start with conversations at the leadership team level. And I think they have to have conversations that they may or may not be, depending on the organization, but they may or may not be having.
Yeah.
So everything that we've talked about here today, I watch large organizations really struggle with this notion of what does it mean to be a leadership team? What does it mean to want transformation? We do all kinds of things. We slap labels on it. We call it different things. I think the part that's missing is to come to a table and to talk about it and talk about what it would mean and what it would look like. And I think we get busy in organizations, and I see executives want to outsource change.
Yeah.
And I see them want to give it to the director.
You can't just buy change?
No, you can't. You can.
I'm outraged. No, I agree with you.
Yeah, I know. We're preaching to the choir, I'm sure. But it comes back to, it's what I think there's something to, it's not that all of those things are bad or wrong. But I wonder, right? It's a question that I have. So when I engage with an organization, that's what I'm interested in kind of unfolding is, yes, you can do all of those things. And what are you doing as a leadership team to set the direction for where you want to go?
Yeah.
And what conversations do you need to have in your organization that you're not having now that would propel the change forward that you're desiring?
Yeah. So the thing I wanted to ask about, which we haven't talked about, is the thing that I'm sort of exploring right now is this idea of balancing individual insight, individual conviction, individual clarity, and group conviction and group clarity. Because obviously there's many people in this leadership team who believe different things.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you help this team develop one shared set of convictions? Like what is where's the yin and the yang of that for you?
I think that happens through dialogue. So, I think about, who is it? I think it's Bill Isaacs that talks about sort of these different notions of how we can come together, everything from a debate or a discussion to kind of break apart things, to a conversation, to a skillful conversation, and then to, onwards to an ideal generative dialogue. So in a generative dialogue, I think about structurally, I'd be looking for all 4 of those actions to be occurring from the team, and the team would actually be bringing them individually. It wouldn't require facilitation, right? So it wouldn't require a facilitator or a team coach or somebody sitting in the room kind of prompting a move or an oppose. It would actually be a team very skillful at bringing all 4 of those actions. So that's what we see structurally.
Yes.
And then I believe that leadership team can solve anything that's in front of them, as complex and as complicated as business is today. But I think they can do that through generative dialogue. Yeah. And it'll be this space of, something new will emerge and they won't know who exactly brought it forward, but I think it takes time.
Yeah. And so this is basically getting people to the point where, I don't know, self-facilitating isn't the word, in a way, like everyone's being a good actor instead of a bad actor in the system.
Yeah. I think it's about they each have they are bringing leadership range, right? So there is this notion in generative dialogue where let's say for a moment, I'm the CEO of that team, but in order to be in generative dialogue, I've got to get out of my role, my power, and join with everybody. And that people need to take turns in coming in and leading.
Yes.
So I think that requires time.
It does, and people feel strapped for time. People feel rushed to make decisions. And I mean, this is just my own belief. I think generally people are paid to, or feel like they're paid to be smart.
Yeah.
Right.
To make the decision.
We're hired for our expertise, and what you're talking about is in open space. They talk about preparing to be surprised.
Yeah.
And I think the only way that these kind of generative conversations can happen is if we're not attached to outcomes, which is that's a challenging needle to thread.
I totally agree. I think you can, although I haven't given up hope. I believe that it's out there, and I believe that people are willing. I believe leadership teams are willing to experience it incrementally. I'm not sure that every leadership team is ready to go off to a full 8 hours of open space.
No.
But I do believe that in blocks of time, given something super important that's kind of staring them in the face, and that it's sometimes this stuck conversation that they think they're having over and over again.
Yeah.
If they feel like they can move the needle forward on that, my experience has been they'll start to create more space for giving it a try.
Like, so can we ground this? Like, what? Not that there's an easy recipe or a quick way out, but like, what do you feel like are the ways that you want people to be unsticking? If you're like, here, like, you guys have to do these 3 things, like, for the love of God, please do these things, or stop doing these 3 things.
Yeah. I think it's about finding the conversation that matters, like the important conversation that a team is not having sometimes, or is having, but they feel like they're not getting anywhere with it.
Yes.
I think those are often like they're the flags. They're like the places to start.
Go to like the hot question.
Yeah, like it's like the warning signal. Like, start here.
Yeah.
We don't know where it will take you.
Yeah.
And chances are, like, what you'll discover will be different than what that flag was pointing to. But I think it's a doorway.
Very interesting. Okay, start with the hard part. That's good. That's like the opposite of what I usually say. Don't start with the tusks if you're going to eat an elephant, but okay. So start with the tusks.
Yeah, well, I think you have to start with something that you care about.
Yeah, that's fair.
In order to make it, and I don't disagree with you. So I don't think that a team should tackle all the tough stuff right out of the gate. But I do think you have to start with a conversation that you care about.
Okay.
And I also think that, the mission that I'm on is helping to raise the awareness of how we have conversations. Because I think in that when we can look at structure of how we're having a conversation and begin to see both how we individually show up and how we're impacting the group that we're working with, I think in that lies the empowerment for each individual to start to own, hey, wait a minute, this isn't lost or hopeless, or I don't have to be anointed with a title in order to actually have an impact on an outcome.
So just being aware of how you show up. I agree. And how you might be contributing to the system. Yeah. For sure. That's self-awareness. Okay. Start with the hard stuff, self-awareness. I'm keeping it, we're going to do 3. This is going to be so important. We're going to do 3. There's got to be 3 things.
Yeah. I think the other is to bring your authentic voice. And for some, that'll be easy. For others, that'll be harder. Yeah.
And this goes back to the stance piece that you were talking about, which is finding your own, what feels right for you. Yeah. This is very interesting. That's a lot. And I think if in negotiation, they sometimes talk about naming the game. And I think that second piece of just being aware of the patterns, you and I think what we share is this idea of the conversation is a material, and you can be aware, you can see it, and you can shape it. Which is important. And then you can design systems that will make it more flow better or feel better or, become more productive. One thing I did want to talk about is you mentioned a facilitator's bag when people come to your intensive. And I realized I never thought about the fact that I have a bag until the guy I was talking to him at the last workshop. I'm looking around for it, but it's not up here. Yeah. He was like, oh God, I saw this facilitator do this, and I don't always do that. And do you have a little bag and that you carry with you into your meetings? And if so, can you take a picture of it for me at some point? Because I'm doing a little bit of a study of what that perfect facilitator's field pouch might be.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm happy to take a picture and send it to you.
That'd be awesome.
So yes, I have standard things. What's in it? Yeah. So always stickies, markers. I'm super picky about the markers that I use. I have 3 different kinds. All have their own purpose that I'm happy to share. Years ago, I ran across this magic stuff that's it's whiteout tape for posters. So it's made by 3M. Okay. And if you mess up, which I always do in making posters, you can white it out and you don't have to throw away the whole thing.
Amazing.
It's awesome. So stickies of all kinds and colors. I also have a sticky wall. I don't use it as much, but it's great for index cards and things like that. So it's a great big piece of paper and you just put sticky stuff on it and you can,
That's cool. This just goes to my theory that the tools matter, and they are actually one of the interfaces that a conversation can happen on, which is why it matters to you. Yeah. Because you're aware of how it affects the conversation.
So can I share a story with you?
Please do.
I was coaching a corporate pair, their director and deputy director. And we were in a meeting, and I actually didn't have my facilitator's kit because we were coaching. And I wasn't going for stickies on the wall and facilitation, but you never know when it's going to emerge. And so there was something that emerged in the conversation, and I really wanted them to take index cards. So I sat quietly as they were talking, and I'm tearing up a sheet of paper that I had to cut it into, and I had no scissors, so I'm just tearing up little squares of paper. Yeah.
That's amazing. And it was, and it did the trick. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So yes, I've had the same thing happen. I was, last summer I was at the Harvard Negotiation Institute, and I was like, I can't have this conversation without paper. And so I started doing exactly that. It freaked out my opponent because they don't use sticky notes in the legal field. It's not, what are you doing? I'm like, dude, I need these. I can't talk without them. All right. Sorry. So I actually discovered, it's very interesting. I had to ask permission. I had to be invitational about the materials I was using, which was like a new thing for me.
Yeah.
It was kind of eye-opening. So we're almost at the end of our time together. It's gone so fast. Is there anything we haven't talked about with regards to designing conversations for more flow and effectiveness and joy and mindfulness that we have not touched on that you want to make sure that we do touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, we've covered a lot of territory today, so
We have.
I'm feeling like we've probably at least skimmed over each of the topics. I think the thing that I care about is just raising the awareness around how we have conversations. I think there's a lot to that, and I think there's a lot of benefit from it.
Would that be the answer to the question of if you could have the world have one conversation, what would it be? Would it be that, to talk about conversations?
Yeah, I would love to. I would love for people to engage, myself included, in the work that I do. But I'd love for us to engage in more dialogue. Yeah. I think it's missing in our society. I think it's missing in our organizations. And it's like all the tools and the technology and the things that we've learned and mindfulness and transformation, all of those things super important. And I think somewhere along the way, we're just forgetting how to engage in effective conversation. Yeah.
I think the conversation that's part of that it seems important is to talk about how we're talking.
Yeah.
And to say like, wait, before we even get into the content, how do we want to feel about this, and what would it look like if we're doing it good?
Yeah.
And I think we forget that's in a way that's kind of like you're asking groups to have, agreements about how they want to behave before we get into the content. That's so important. It's so critical.
I say to groups all the time, so if they reach a point where they're feeling stuck about the topic, often it's because they're stuck about what. And so I will often ask them to take a pause and look at how. So kind of another operating, just general principle that I have is when we can't talk about what anymore, let's switch to how. Because if we talk a little bit about how we're having the conversation, it'll make getting back into the what easier.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think this idea of taking a pause is so critical. And we forget, maybe this is why I was asking about the move thing, because I'm a mover. And that's what you're talking about, is having a balanced approach to conversations, which is really beautiful. Yeah. Marsha, I really appreciate your time. I think what you're offering to the world is really, really great. I wish I could take a week to go to San Francisco to come to your Agile Intensive, because it sounds like I would absolutely enjoy it. I'll make sure I put a link to that in the show notes and stuff like that. And if it sounds like Reading the Room is one book. If there's anything else that you think we should, here's the core, like what you haven't read blank.
Yeah. I can absolutely
that would be really, really awesome.
We have a 2-day class in June in Washington, D.C. that is just on structural dynamics.
Really?
So it's a little bit of a deep dive. So yeah, if 5 days isn't for you, we have a version that
it's not that it's not worth. I think it sounds absolutely worth it. There's just like,
it's hard.
I have to serve my clients too.
Yeah.
Time for that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you. Love the mission that you're on.
Thank you very much. Likewise.
Yeah.
We're gonna, this is the thing. If how we talk is how we live, right? So I appreciate you doing the work that you do, and I appreciate you making time to talk with me about it.
Thank you.
We'll close it there and see. I'll